When a reporter is assigned to interpret newspaper entrepreneur Charles Foster Kane's dying words, his investigation eventually exposes a fascinating image of a complicated man who ascended from obscurity to unprecedented heights. Citizen Kane starts with the camera wandering around Xanadu, a mysterious empty palace in Florida. The camera pauses on a no trespassing sign and a giant K wrought on the gate before gently moving towards the home, where it looks to pass through a lighted window. The camera focuses on the elderly man's lips, who speaks a single word, Rosebud. He then drops the globe, which rolls to the floor and shatters. A door opens, and a white uniformed nurse enters the room, her reflection in the curve of a broken piece of glass. She puts the elderly man's arms over his chest and covers his face with a sheet. The news of his death soon spread throughout the city. And so, the newspaper company he owned, the New York Inquirer, is desperate to uncover the meaning of his mysterious last word. Is it someone's name? A beloved pet? Some long-lost, unrequited love? The truth, which isn't revealed until the closing scene, represents one of the all-time greatest motion picture ironies. The company released a newsreel titled News on the March Reel, which was to serve as a long obituary and summary of Kane's fascinating life and work. The reel producer informs the reporters that he is dissatisfied with the reel since it just chronicles Kane's life without showing who he is. He wonders whether the mysterious word holds the secret to Kane's character. He decides to postpone the newsreel's publication and sends a reporter, Jerry Thompson, to interview Kane's family and friends in an attempt to uncover the meaning behind the word. Thompson first interviews Kane's ex-wife, Susan Alexander Kane, who works as a dancer and singer at a dingy bar. But Susan appears drunk and uncooperative. A waiter leans over her and informs Thompson that Susan has refused to speak about Kane since his death, although she talked about him often while he was alive. The waiter also claims that when Kane died, he questioned Susan about Rosebud, to which she replied that she had never heard of it. Thompson then visits the bank where Kane's boyhood guardian, Walter Parks Thatcher, has kept his memoirs. As Thompson starts reading these memoirs, the picture on the page fades into a flashback to Kane's boyhood. Kane's life story is told in chronological order using a sequence of flashbacks from 5 distinct perspectives. The first flashback shows Thatcher meeting Kane. Kane's mother, Mary, runs a boarding home in rural Colorado. Instead of payment, one of her tenants offers her shares in what she believes is a worthless mine. Nonetheless, it turns out to be ownership of the Colorado Lode, a working gold mine. Finding herself suddenly wealthy, she decides to send her son, Charles, to be raised by her banker, Thatcher. Unfortunately, Kane's relationship with Thatcher was never good. In snippets from their years together, we would find out that Kane indulged in unethical journalism, spending lots of money and frequently enraging Thatcher. Thompson later interviewed Kane's close friends, Mr. Bernstein and Jedediah Leland. They all use flashbacks to share their memories of him. All the stories reveal Kane's arrogance, thoughtlessness, moral bankruptcy, need for attention, and inability to give love. The next time the audience sees Kane, he is older and bought a small newspaper called the New York Inquirer. Upon taking control of the company, his first act was to lower the editorial standards and print sensation instead of what the old staff were used to. As the Inquirer's popularity increases, so does Kane's influence. He finally recruits a writing team from New York's most successful newspaper and grows the Inquirer across the nation. Kane becomes a larger-than-life celebrity in New York thanks to the assistance of a college buddy, Jedediah Leland, and the newspaper boss, Mr. Bernstein. In his pursuit of political influence, Kane strategically marries Emily Norton, the niece of President Monroe. The marriage is not one of love, but rather a calculated move to further his political aspirations. Kane sees Emily as a means to an end, a connection to the highest levels of government that will help him achieve his goals. Despite Emily's initial excitement at being thrust into the world of high society, she soon realizes the true nature of her marriage to Kane. She realizes that she is little more than a pawn in Kane's political games, with her desires and ambitions sidelined in favor of his relentless pursuit of power. Kane eventually joins politics, but contrary to what we believe, that the worthiest leaders should be those who serve and recognize the corrosive effect of power on the citizen. Kane is not like that. When Kane runs for governor of New York, he claims to be, as his best friend Leland says, the great liberal. Next, we see Kane giving a stump speech in a scene that would not look too out of place on most campaign trails. And his pitch is purely more of an appeal intended to arouse patriotic emotions. He claims to be fighting for the underpaid and underfed, but his only real policy pledge is to arrest and prosecute his political opponent, the allegedly corrupt Governor Jim Gettys. But Kane, the political dilettante, gets his deserved fate that very night, when Gettys reveals what a real cutthroat politician can do. Kane has been having a typically reckless affair with the cabaret singer Susan Alexander, and Gettys gives him a taste of his own medicine by ensuring the story gets splashed on every newspaper in the state that Kane doesn't own, generating delightfully written headlines. Like most politicians, Kane is a spoiled rich boy. "I always gagged on the silver spoon," the unreflective Kane says as he is being deposed as the head of his media empire. "If I hadn't been rich, I could have been a great man." Leland says all Kane ever wanted was love, and he ran for office to get the voters to love him. Like most politicians, his personality is built over a bottomless hole that can never be filled. Soon, he falls victim to the kind of yellow journalism he has promoted all his life. Yet he does agree to stay with his new lover instead of his wife. Has he found a nurturing relationship at last? Kane's second marriage is more touching than his first, since it begins happily and breaks down tragically. Susan seems like a bright and bubbly companion who is good for the pompous Kane. She is giggly when she first sees him covered in mud that was splashed on him by a passing carriage. He, in turn, keeps her entertained with magic tricks. Unfortunately, Kane becomes preoccupied with trying to establish Susan as a famous opera singer, even though her vocal range is not good enough for that. He ignores all the warnings, including her own. Jebediah, in turn, was tasked with reviewing the performance, and he is brutally honest, writing a scathing review. Kane fires him, but Jebediah still publishes the negative review, further humiliating Susan and launching headlong into a loveless and depressing marriage. Kane's toxic anger towards Susan grows, and when he hits her, she leaves him for good. The last time we see Kane in the film, he's a beaten man, walking between two mirrors that create an infinity of reflections, as if his relentlessly self-constructed identity has been shattered, and all that is left are shards of imperfect images. He is at his lowest point, alone and angry in the palace of Xanadu, he built for himself. As Kane himself says in the opening newsreel detailing the events of his life, "I am, have been, and always will be one thing, an American." As Thompson feels like he's getting close to figuring out what Rosebud means, he finally makes his way to Xanadu, where he interviews Kane's old butler. The butler tells Thompson that after Susan had left, Kane destroyed a room in fury and rage, but stopped when he saw a small snow globe and whispered, "Rosebud." Thompson is disappointed that this is the end of the line. He concludes that it must have been nothing, and consigns himself to releasing newsreel footage of a deeply flawed man. However, in the final moments of the film, we see Kane's staff destroying his property and clutter. One man chucks a sled into the fire, upon which we can see the name Rosebud. It turns out, Rosebud was the sled that Kane played with before he was taken away by Thatcher all those years ago, symbolizing his lost childhood that resulted in the man he had become. So, despite him still living in a mansion, Kane dies alone with his material possessions.